Every Sunday after church, the neighborhood kids would gather at Mrs. Sarah Whitfield's kitchen table for fresh-baked chocolate chip cookies and stories about her garden. At 72, she was everyone's favorite grandmother, the kind who remembered birthdays, mended scraped knees, and always had a warm meal ready for anyone who needed it. Her small house on Maple Street was filled with the comfortable chaos of grandchildren's artwork, knitting projects, and the sweet smell of whatever was rising in her oven. What the entire neighborhood didn't know was that before she became Grandma Sarah, before she learned to bake the perfect cookie or grow prize-winning roses, Sarah Whitfield had been Staff Sergeant Whitfield, one of the first women ever selected for Delta Force, America's most elite special operations unit. For 15 years, she had operated in the world's most dangerous places, completing missions so classified that even her own family had no idea what she really did for a living. This is the story of how a quiet Sunday afternoon would reveal the most extraordinary secret in suburban America, and how sometimes the most dangerous people in the world are hiding in plain sight, armed with nothing more than a plate of homemade cookies and a lifetime of carefully guarded memories. The morning sun filtered through the lace curtains of Sarah Whitfield's kitchen as she pulled the third batch of chocolate chip cookies from the oven. The timer on her counter read 11:47 a.m., exactly 13 minutes before the first wave of neighborhood children would arrive for their weekly tradition. Sarah moved through her kitchen with the precision of someone who had performed this routine hundreds of times. Each cookie was placed exactly 2 inches apart on the cooling rack. The milk was already poured into small glasses, lined up in perfect rows. Fresh napkins were folded and stacked beside plates that had been warming in the lower oven. "Grandma Sarah," came the familiar voice of 8-year-old Tommy Martinez from the back door. "Are they ready?" "Almost, sweetheart," Sarah called back, smoothing her floral apron and checking her appearance in the reflection of the microwave door. "Let the others know they can come in." Within minutes, her kitchen was filled with the controlled chaos of 6 children ranging in age from 7 to 12. They climbed onto chairs around her large wooden table, chattering about their morning at Sunday school and plans for the rest of the weekend. "Tell us about your garden, Grandma Sarah," requested 10-year-old Lucy Patterson. "Did the tomatoes grow bigger this week?" Sarah smiled, settling into her chair at the head of the table with her own glass of milk. For nearly 8 years, since she'd moved to Maple Street, this had been her favorite part of the week. These children had filled a space in her life that she hadn't even realized was empty. "Well," she began, launching into a detailed account of her battle with aphids and her triumph over a particularly stubborn patch of weeds. The children listened with the kind of rapt attention usually reserved for action movies, hanging on every word of her horticultural adventure. What none of them could see was the way Sarah's eyes automatically tracked the movements of every person visible through her kitchen window. How she had positioned her chair to maintain clear sightlines to both entrances. How her seemingly random placement of kitchen knives within arm's reach was anything but accidental. Old habits, she often reminded herself, die hard. They were halfway through their second batch of cookies when the doorbell rang. Sarah frowned slightly. She wasn't expecting anyone, and most of the neighborhood children who might visit were already gathered around her table. "I'll be right back," she told the children, wiping her hands on her apron as she walked toward the front door. Through the peephole, she saw a man in his 50s wearing a dark suit and holding a briefcase. Something about his posture, the way he held himself, sent a familiar chill down her spine. Military bearing was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. Sarah opened the door but left the chain lock engaged. "Can I help you, Mrs. Sarah Whitfield?" the man asked, his voice carrying the crisp diction of someone accustomed to giving orders. "Yes. My name is Colonel James Morrison, United States Army. I need to speak with you about a matter of national security." Sarah's blood turned to ice. For 35 years, she had been living under the assumption that her past was buried so deep it would never surface. She had retired from Delta Force in 1989, with full honors and a promise that her service record would remain classified indefinitely. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I think you have the wrong person," she said, her voice steady despite the hammering of her heart. "I'm just a retired teacher." Morrison's expression didn't change, but he reached into his jacket and withdrew a photograph. Even through the narrow gap allowed by the chain lock, Sarah could see it clearly. It showed her at 25, wearing full combat gear and standing with her Delta Force unit in what looked like a Middle Eastern desert. Staff Sergeant Sarah Elizabeth Whitfield, Morrison said quietly. Delta Force, 1974 to 1989. 15 years of classified operations across 4 continents. 3 silver stars, 2 bronze stars, and a Purple Heart. Does that sound more familiar? Sarah's hand tightened on the doorframe. In the background, she could hear the children's laughter drifting from the kitchen, completely unaware that their beloved grandma Sarah's entire world was about to change. The children, she said quietly. They can't hear this conversation. Morrison nodded. May I come in? What I have to discuss with you is significant. Sarah led Colonel Morrison to her small living room, closing the French doors that separated it from the kitchen. She could still hear the children chattering happily as they finished their cookies, but their voices were now muffled and distant. How did you find me? Sarah asked, settling into her favorite armchair, the one positioned to observe both the front and back entrances to her house. We've always known where you were, Mrs. Whitfield. Part of our responsibility to protect former operators includes maintaining awareness of their locations and security status. Morrison opened his briefcase and withdrew a thick folder. What's changed is that we need your help. I've been retired for 35 years, Colonel. I'm 72 years old. Whatever crisis you're facing, I'm sure you have more suitable candidates. Morrison leaned forward. 3 days ago, a group of former Soviet operatives kidnapped the daughter of one of our current Delta Force commanders. The kidnappers have made it clear that they know details about classified operations from the 1980s. Operations that you were personally involved in. Sarah felt the familiar tingle of adrenaline beginning to course through her veins. Which operations? Operation Silver Phoenix. Afghanistan. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. Silver Phoenix had been one of the most sensitive missions of her career. A deep penetration operation into Soviet-controlled territory to eliminate a high-value target who was coordinating arms shipments to insurgent groups. The mission had been successful, but it had cost the lives of 2 team members and had nearly triggered an international incident. That operation was burned from all records, Sarah said slowly. How could anyone outside the immediate participants know about it? That's what we need to find out. But more importantly, we need someone who understands the operational details to help us negotiate for the hostages' release. Morrison's expression grew more serious. The kidnappers specifically requested to speak with the grandmother from Delta Force. They know who you are, Mrs. Whitfield, and they know where you live. Sarah's blood went cold. My family is currently under discreet protection, though they don't know it. But Miss Whitfield, these people have demonstrated sophisticated intelligence capabilities and a willingness to target civilians. We need your help to end this before it escalates. In the kitchen, Sarah could hear young Tommy Martinez asking where she kept the extra napkins. The normalcy of the moment stood in stark contrast to the conversation she was having in her living room. What exactly are you asking me to do? Morrison pulled a secure satellite phone from his briefcase. We need you to make contact with the kidnapper. They've indicated they'll only negotiate with you directly. We believe your personal knowledge of Operation Silver Phoenix is the key to understanding what they really want. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, studying the man across from her. 3 decades of civilian life had not dulled her ability to read people, and everything about Colonel Morrison's demeanor suggested he was telling the truth. If I do this, she said finally, if I help you, what guarantees do I have that my cover will remain intact? These children, my neighbors, my family, they don't know about my past. I've worked very hard to keep it that way. We'll do everything possible to maintain your operational security. But Mrs. Whitfield, I have to be honest with you. If we can't resolve this situation, if these kidnappers decide to go public with what they know, your secret is going to come out anyway. Sarah looked through the French doors at the children finishing their cookies in her kitchen. Tommy was helping Lucy reach the cookie jar on the top shelf. The Patterson twins were arguing over who got the last glass of milk. Everything was exactly as it should be on a quiet Sunday afternoon in suburban America. Except that it was. All right, Colonel, she said, taking the satellite phone from his hands. What do I need to know? Morrison quickly briefed her on the situation. The kidnapped girl was Amanda Peterson, 13 years old, daughter of Lieutenant Colonel Mark Peterson, current Delta Force team leader. She had been taken from a shopping mall in Virginia 3 days earlier. The kidnappers had contacted the Pentagon 12 hours later with their demands: a phone conversation with the grandmother and $50 million in untraceable cryptocurrency. They specifically mentioned details from Silver Phoenix that only someone on the ground during that operation could know. Morrison explained. References to the target's compound layout, the extraction route, even the weather conditions during the infiltration. Sarah felt the pieces of a puzzle beginning to align in her mind. Who else from that mission is still alive? Besides you? Only 2 others. Captain Williams, now retired and living in Florida, and Sergeant First Class Jackson, who died in a car accident 6 months ago. The timing isn't coincidental, Sarah said grimly. Someone has been planning this for a while. Morrison nodded. We believe Jackson may have been compromised before his death. The FBI is investigating, but we need to focus on the immediate threat to Amanda Peterson. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the satellite phone. The number had already been programmed in. It rang twice before a heavily accented voice answered. The grandmother calls at last. I'm here, Sarah said, her voice automatically shifting to the clipped professional tone she hadn't used in 3 decades. Let's talk. Staff Sergeant Whitfield. Or do you prefer Grandma Sarah these days? The voice carried a note of amusement that made Sarah's skin crawl. Tell me, how are the chocolate chip cookies? The statement confirmed Sarah's worst fears. These people hadn't just identified her. They had been watching her, studying her routine, learning about her life. What do you want? She asked. Justice, Mrs. Whitfield. In 1987, Operation Silver Phoenix eliminated my father, Colonel Dmitry Volkov, Soviet intelligence. You killed him. Sarah's memory instantly transported her back to that night in Afghanistan. The target compound. The careful infiltration. The brief firefight that had ended with a single precise shot from her rifle. She had never known the target's name. Operational security had limited her briefing to essential tactical information only. Your father was coordinating arms shipments to terrorist organizations, Sarah said calmly. He was a legitimate military target. He was my father, and now I want you to experience what it feels like to lose family. The threat was clear, but Sarah detected something else in the caller's voice. Uncertainty, perhaps. The slight tremor of someone who was in over their head. Killing a child won't bring your father back, Sarah said, and it won't give you the satisfaction you think it will. Trust me, I know. You know? What could you possibly know about loss? Sarah looked through the doors at the children in her kitchen, now getting ready to leave for their own family dinners. I know what it's like to carry the weight of what you've done. I know what it's like to see faces in the dark that will never leave you alone. And I know that revenge is a poison that destroys the person seeking it more than their intended target. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. The girl will be released when you come to take her place, the voice finally said. Alone. Unarmed. You have 24 hours to decide. The line went dead. Colonel Morrison was staring at her with an expression of professional respect mixed with concern. Mrs. Whitfield, you know we can't let you walk into what's obviously a trap, and you know that little girl is going to die if we don't give them what they want, Sarah replied, setting the satellite phone on her coffee table. I've been in hostage situations before, Colonel. The kidnapper sounded young, emotional and inexperienced. That makes him dangerous, but it also makes him manageable. Even if that's true, you're 72 years old. Your operational days are... Are you suggesting I'm too old to handle one grieving amateur with a vendetta? Sarah's voice carried an edge that made Morrison sit back in his chair. For just a moment, the sweet grandmother facade had slipped, revealing something much more dangerous underneath. No, ma'am, I'm suggesting that there might be other options. Sarah stood and walked to her kitchen window, watching the last of the children skip down her front walkway toward their homes. Tommy Martinez turned back to wave at her, his gap-toothed grin visible even from a distance. Colonel, let me tell you something about those children. Every Sunday for 8 years they've come to my house for cookies and stories. They trust me to keep them safe, to be the stable, predictable presence in their lives. But more than that, they've taught me something I'd forgotten during my years in the military. She turned back to Morrison. They've taught me that some things are worth protecting, regardless of the cost. Amanda Peterson is someone's daughter, someone's little girl. If there's a chance I can bring her home safely, then that's what I'm going to do. The Pentagon won't authorize a unilateral operation by a retired operative. Sarah smiled, and Morrison was surprised to see that it wasn't the gentle, grandmotherly smile he'd expected. It was the smile of someone who had spent 15 years operating in the shadows, someone who was accustomed to making her own rules. Then it's a good thing I'm retired and no longer subject to Pentagon authorization. Over the next 6 hours, Sarah Whitfield underwent a transformation that would have shocked anyone who knew her as the cookie-baking grandmother from Maple Street. Colonel Morrison had reluctantly agreed to provide tactical support, though he maintained that the operation was unofficial and that Sarah was acting as a civilian consultant. In her basement, Sarah opened a steel footlocker that hadn't been disturbed in over 2 decades. Inside, wrapped in military-grade preservation cloth, were items that represented a lifetime of specialized training, night vision equipment, tactical communication gear, and a custom .45 caliber pistol that had been her sidearm throughout her Delta Force career. As she cleaned and inspected each piece of equipment, muscle memory took over. Her hands moved with the automatic precision of someone who had performed these tasks thousands of times. The weight of the pistol in her hands felt as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Miss Whitfield," Morrison said from the basement stairs, "our technical team has triangulated the kidnappers' location. It's an abandoned warehouse complex, about 40 miles outside the city. Satellite imagery shows at least 3 individuals on site, possibly more." Sarah nodded, checking the action on her pistol one final time. "What's the tactical situation?" "The building is isolated, which works in our favor. Multiple entry points, but most are sealed or blocked. The kidnappers appear to be using the main entrance exclusively. We've identified 2 vehicles on site, a van and a sedan. Escape routes, limited. The warehouse is surrounded by open ground on 3 sides, with a river to the north. If they run, they'll have to use the access road." Sarah slipped the pistol into a shoulder holster and pulled on a dark jacket that concealed her equipment. "Time frame? The exchange is set for midnight. You have 4 hours. As Sarah climbed the stairs from her basement, she passed the kitchen where she had served cookies just hours earlier. The room still smelled faintly of vanilla and chocolate chips. On the counter, a plate of leftover cookies sat covered with plastic wrap, waiting for the children's visit next Sunday. If there was a next Sunday, "Colonel," Sarah said as they prepared to leave, "if something goes wrong tonight, if I don't make it back, I need you to promise me something." Morrison nodded. "Those children have been coming here every Sunday for 8 years. They're going to need an explanation for why I'm suddenly gone. Tell them." Sarah paused, looking around her kitchen one last time. "Tell them that Grandma Sarah had to take care of some important business, but that she wants them to remember to always be kind to each other and to look after people who need help." "You're coming back, Mrs. Whitfield," Sarah smiled, but there was a sadness in her eyes that Morrison couldn't quite interpret. "In my experience, Colonel, the people who make it home are the ones who don't assume they will." The abandoned warehouse complex squatted against the night sky like a collection of sleeping giants. Sarah approached on foot, having left Morrison and his tactical support team 2 miles away with instructions to maintain radio silence, unless she specifically requested assistance. The building the kidnappers had chosen was smart tactically, isolated, defensible, with clear sightlines in all directions. But it was also predictable, the kind of location that someone with military training but limited operational experience might select. Sarah moved through the shadows around the perimeter, using skills that felt as natural as breathing despite decades of disuse. The muscle memory of her Delta Force training had returned completely, as if the intervening years of suburban life had been nothing more than an extended cover identity. She could see the 2 vehicles Morrison had mentioned, both parked near the main entrance. Through a broken window on the 2nd floor, she glimpsed movement and the glow of what appeared to be battery-powered lanterns. Using a small fiber-optic camera, Sarah peered through a crack in the building's rear wall. Inside, she could see 3 men and a teenage girl tied to a chair in the center of a large, empty room. The girl appeared unharmed but frightened. One of the men was pacing nervously while checking his watch repeatedly. The setup was exactly what Sarah had expected from an inexperienced operation. Too few personnel, inadequate security measures, and emotional decision-making. These men were dangerous because they were desperate, but they weren't professionals. Sarah keyed her radio once, a prearranged signal to let Morrison know she was in position, and then switched it off. What happened next would happen according to her own judgment, not according to orders from people who were sitting safely miles away. Sarah entered the warehouse through a service door that had been left unlocked. Another sign of the kidnapper's amateur status. She moved silently through the dark interior, using the building's layout to her advantage. When she was within 30 feet of the kidnapper's position, she called out, "I'm here," as promised, alone and unarmed. The pacing man spun toward her voice, raising an assault rifle that he held with the awkward grip of someone not entirely comfortable with the weapon. In the dim light, Sarah could see that he was young, perhaps 25, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had been running on adrenaline and very little sleep. "Staff Sergeant Whitfield," he said, his voice carrying the same accent she had heard on the phone. "You can't." "I gave you my word," Sarah replied, stepping into the circle of light cast by the lanterns. "Now let the girl go. First, you will answer for what you did to my father." Sarah studied the young man's face, seeing the family resemblance now that she could observe him directly. He had the same sharp features and intense eyes as the Soviet intelligence officer she had eliminated 34 years earlier. "What's your name?" she asked. "Alexei Volkov." "Alexei, I want you to understand something. Your father was a soldier, and so was. We were on opposite sides of a conflict that neither of us had started. What happened in Afghanistan was not personal." "It was personal to me," Alexei's voice cracked with emotion. "He was my father, and you took him away from me." Sarah took a careful step closer, noting the positions of the other two men. "How old were you when he died?" 8 years old. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 8 years old. The same age as Tommy Martinez, the little boy who visited her kitchen every Sunday. The same age she had been when her own father died in a car accident, leaving her with nothing but memories and unanswered questions. "I'm sorry," she said, and meant it. "I'm sorry you lost your father, and I'm sorry you've spent your life carrying that pain. But killing this girl won't heal what's broken inside you. It will give me justice." "No," Sarah said firmly. "It will give you a moment of satisfaction followed by a lifetime of regret. Trust me, Alexei, I know the difference." For a moment, uncertainty flickered across the young man's face. Then one of his companions, clearly older and more hardened, spoke up in rapid Russian. Whatever he said caused Alexei's expression to harden again. "Enough talking," Alexei said, raising his rifle. "You killed my father. Now I kill you." "And then what?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious. "You shoot me. You probably shoot the girl to eliminate witnesses. And then you run. Where exactly do you think you're going to go? Do you think the United States military is going to just forget that you kidnapped and murdered the daughter of one of their officers? We have an extraction plan." Sarah almost smiled. "Do you really? Or do you have the promise of an extraction plan from people who consider you expendable?" She gestured toward his companions. "Ask yourself this, Alexei. Why did these men agree to help you with this operation? Out of loyalty to your father's memory, or because someone is paying them?" She could see doubt beginning to creep into Alexei's eyes as he glanced at his companion. Sarah pressed her advantage. "Your father was a professional intelligence officer. What do you think he would say about an operation this poorly planned, this emotionally driven? Do you think he would approve of putting his son's life at risk for a revenge fantasy that can't possibly succeed?" The standoff stretched on for nearly a minute, with Alexei's rifle wavering between Sarah and the floor. Sarah could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, grief and anger warring with the growing realization that his plan was fundamentally flawed. Finally, the older of Alexei's companions made the decision for him. With a muttered curse in Russian, he raised his own weapon and aimed it at Sarah. "Enough of this. We finish the job and go." But Sarah had been expecting this moment. In one fluid motion that combined 35 years of training with the kind of muscle memory that never truly fades, she drew her concealed pistol and fired twice. The older man dropped without a sound. The second companion was reaching for his weapon when Sarah's third shot took him down as well. Alexei stood frozen, His rifle still pointed in Sarah's general direction, but his finger nowhere near the trigger. The silence in the warehouse was deafening. "It's over, Alexei," Sarah said quietly. "Put the weapon down." Instead, tears began streaming down the young man's face. "I don't know what to do," he whispered. "I've spent my entire life planning for this moment. And now, I don't know what to do." Sarah slowly holstered her pistol and took a step toward him. "You do what your father would have wanted you to do. You choose to live instead of die. You choose to build something instead of destroying it. But I dishonored his memory. I failed." "No," Sarah said firmly. "You honored his memory by trying to seek justice for him. But real honor means knowing when to stop. Knowing when you've gone far enough. Your father raised a son who was loyal enough to spend his life trying to avenge him. That's not failure, Alexei. That's love." Slowly, carefully, Alexei lowered his rifle to the floor. Sarah immediately moved to untie Amanda Peterson, who had remained remarkably calm throughout the entire confrontation. "Are you hurt?" Sarah asked the girl. "No, ma'am, just scared." "That's over now. You're safe." As Sarah helped Amanda to her feet, she kept one eye on Alexei, who had collapsed into a sitting position against a concrete pillar. The young man looked exhausted, as if the weight of 34 years of grief had finally become too much to carry. "What happens to me now?" he asked. Sarah activated her radio for the first time since entering the warehouse. "Colonel Morrison, this is Whitfield. I need immediate extraction for one adult female and one juvenile female. Also request medical and psychological support for one adult male subject who will be surrendering voluntarily." "Roger that, Mrs. Whitfield. Teams are moving to your location now. What's your status?" Sarah looked around the warehouse, at the two bodies, at the frightened but unharmed girl, at the young man who had been carrying his father's death like a stone in his chest for most of his life. "Situation resolved, Colonel. Everyone's coming home." 3 weeks later, Sarah Whitfield was back in her kitchen on Maple Street, preparing for another Sunday afternoon with the neighborhood children. The routine was exactly the same: fresh cookies cooling on racks, milk poured into small glasses, napkins folded and waiting. But everything was different. The children arrived at their usual time, chattering about their morning at Sunday school and their plans for the rest of the weekend. But now, mixed in with their usual questions about her garden and requests for extra cookies, were new questions. "Is it true you used to be a soldier, Grandma Sarah?" asked Lucy Patterson. "I saw it on the news," added Tommy Martinez. "They said you saved a girl from bad guys." Sarah had known this moment would come. Despite the Pentagon's efforts to minimize publicity, the story had leaked. A local news reporter had somehow connected her address to reports of a civilian consultant who had assisted in the rescue of Amanda Peterson. The reporter had done enough digging to uncover the basics of Sarah's military service. "Yes," Sarah said simply. "A long time ago, I was a soldier." "Were you scared?" asked one of the Patterson twins. Sarah considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But being scared isn't the same as being unable to help people who need help." "Is that why you learned to fight bad guys? To help people?" "That's exactly why," Sarah confirmed. "And it's why I learned to bake cookies too. Sometimes people need someone to fight for them, and sometimes they just need someone to make them feel safe and loved." 8-year-old Tommy raised his hand as if he were in school. "Grandma Sarah, will you teach us how to be brave like you?" Sarah smiled, looking around the table at the eager faces of the children who had unknowingly been her greatest teachers for the past 8 years. "I think you're already braver than you know, but I can teach you the most important lesson I learned in the military." "What's that?" "The strongest people in the world are the ones who use their strength to protect others, especially people who can't protect themselves." As the afternoon wore on, and the children eventually headed home to their families, Sarah reflected on the strange turn her life had taken. The Pentagon had offered her a consulting position, which she had politely declined. Several publishers had approached her about writing a memoir, which she had also declined. But she had accepted one invitation that surprised everyone, including herself. The letter had arrived the previous Tuesday, postmarked from a federal correctional facility in Pennsylvania. Inside, written in careful block letters, was a message from Alexei Volkov. Mrs. Whitfield, I wanted you to know that I am doing well. The counselors here are helping me understand things about my father's death and my own life that I never saw clearly before. They tell me that grief can make people do things they would never normally consider, and that healing means learning to carry loss without letting it destroy you. I have been thinking about what you said in the warehouse about choosing to build instead of destroy. When I am released, my lawyer says it will likely be in 18 months. I would like to do something positive with my life. I am learning English better and studying American history. I think I would like to teach, maybe help other young people who are carrying too much anger. I also wanted to tell you that I found some of my father's personal papers that my mother had saved. In them, I discovered that he had written about the war in Afghanistan and about soldiers like you who were just doing their duty. He understood that what happened to him was part of a larger conflict, not a personal attack. I think he would be proud that his death ultimately led to a girl being saved instead of hurt. Thank you for showing me what real strength looks like. I hope your cookies are as good as the children in your neighborhood say they are. With respect and gratitude. Alexei Volkov. Sarah had read the letter 3 times before filing it carefully in a folder, with Amanda Peterson's thank you card and a letter from the girl's father, expressing his family's eternal gratitude. Now, as she cleaned up the last of the Sunday cookie crumbs and prepared for another quiet evening in her suburban home, Sarah felt a peace that had eluded her for most of her adult life. For 15 years in Delta Force, she had carried out missions that required her to be someone else. Harder, more distant, less vulnerable than she naturally was. For 35 years in retirement, she had carried the weight of those missions in silence, unsure how to integrate her military identity with her civilian life. But in one terrifying night in an abandoned warehouse, she had finally found a way to be both the soldier she had been and the grandmother she had become. The skills that had once made her one of the military's most effective operators had allowed her to save a young girl's life. The wisdom that came from decades of hidden service had helped her reach a broken young man who was drowning in his own grief. 6 months after the warehouse incident, Sarah received another unexpected visitor. This time it was Amanda Peterson herself, accompanied by her parents and her younger brother. Mrs. Whitfield, Amanda said, standing nervously on Sarah's front porch. I wanted to thank you properly for saving my life. Sarah invited the family into her living room, the same room where Colonel Morrison had first revealed that her past had caught up with her present. You don't need to thank me, Amanda, Sarah said. I just did what needed to be done. But you risked your life for someone you didn't even know, Amanda's father said. That's not something most people would do. Sarah looked at the 13-year-old girl who was the same age her own granddaughter would have been if she'd ever had children of her own. Amanda reminds me of someone very important to me. Who? Amanda asked. All the children who visit me every Sunday. All the young people who deserve to grow up in a world where they're safe and protected. Sarah paused. You remind me that some things are worth fighting for, no matter how old you get or how long it's been since you wore a uniform. Amanda reached into her backpack and pulled out a plate covered with aluminum foil. I made these for you. They're chocolate chip cookies. I used my grandmother's recipe. Sarah accepted the plate with a smile that was both proud and slightly amused. I'm sure they're perfect. As the Peterson family prepared to leave, Amanda hung back for a moment. Mrs. Whitfield, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you think it's possible for someone like me to become someone like you? Someone who helps people? Sarah knelt down so she was at eye level with the girl. Amanda, you already are someone who helps people. You survived a terrifying experience with grace and courage. You forgave a young man who had tried to hurt you, and you took the time to thank someone for helping you. Those are the qualities that matter most. But I'm not strong like you. Strength isn't about how much you can lift, or how fast you can run, or how accurately you can shoot, Sarah said. Strength is about choosing to do the right thing even when it's difficult. And from what I've seen, you already have that kind of strength. After the Peterson family left, Sarah sat in her kitchen and tried one of Amanda's cookies. It was slightly overbaked and a little too sweet, exactly the way cookies should be when they're made by a 13-year-old who's still learning her grandmother's recipe. It was perfect. 2 years later, Sarah Whitfield published a small article in the local newspaper. It wasn't about her military service or the warehouse incident. Instead, it was a reflection on the importance of community. the value of intergenerational relationships, and the ways that ordinary people can make extraordinary differences in each other's lives. The article was titled Sunday Cookies and Life Lessons, and it focused on what she had learned from 8 years of hosting neighborhood children in her kitchen. The most important battles, she wrote, are not fought with weapons or tactics or specialized training. They are fought with patience, kindness, and the simple willingness to show up for people who need you. Every Sunday for 8 years, a group of children has taught me that the strongest person in any room is often the one who makes others feel safe, valued, and loved. My military service taught me how to eliminate threats and complete missions. But these children have taught me how to build something lasting, a community where people look after each other, where differences are celebrated rather than feared, and where every person, regardless of age or background, has something valuable to contribute. The child who struggles with reading today might become the teacher who changes lives tomorrow. The shy girl who barely speaks might become the voice that speaks for those who cannot speak for themselves. The boy who asks endless questions might become the scientist who finds answers to problems we haven't even discovered yet. In my former career, success was measured by missions completed and objectives achieved. But in my kitchen, surrounded by the chaos of children's laughter and the comfortable routine of Sunday afternoon cookies, I have learned a different definition of success. Success is Tommy Martinez learning to tie his shoes. Success is Lucy Patterson gaining the confidence to raise her hand in class. Success is creating a space where children feel safe enough to be children. I am often asked about the transition from military service to civilian life, about how someone goes from carrying a weapon to carrying cookies. The truth is that both require the same fundamental qualities: dedication, precision, and an unwavering commitment to the mission. The mission has simply evolved. My advice to other veterans struggling with this transition is simple. Find your Sunday cookies. Find the place where your skills, your experience, and your heart intersect with a community that needs what you have to offer. It might not look like what you expected. It might not feel as dramatic as what you've done before, but it might just be the most important work you'll ever do. The article was reprinted in several veterans' publications and eventually caught the attention of a documentary filmmaker who wanted to tell Sarah's story. She declined to participate, but she did agree to one final interview with a local television station. Mrs. Yu, the reporter asked, "What do you want people to remember about your story?" Sarah considered the question carefully. "I want them to remember that heroes don't always look like what you expect them to look like. They might be your neighbor, your teacher, the person who fixes your car or bags your groceries. Everyone has the capacity to be extraordinary when the situation demands it. And what about the children who visit you every Sunday? What do you hope they learn from knowing you?" "I hope they learn that it's possible to be both strong and gentle, both tough and kind. I hope they understand that real power comes from using your abilities to protect and nurture others, not to dominate or intimidate them." Sarah paused, smiling slightly. "And I hope they remember that the best chocolate chip cookies are made with just a little more love than the recipe calls for." 5 years after the warehouse incident, Tommy Martinez graduated from high school as valedictorian of his class. In his graduation speech, he told the story of a woman who had taught him that strength and gentleness weren't opposites, but rather two sides of the same coin. Lucy Patterson became the first person in her family to attend college, majoring in social work with a focus on helping children from troubled backgrounds. She credited her weekly conversations with Grandma Sarah as the inspiration for her career choice. Amanda Peterson visited Sarah every few months, updating her on her progress in school and her plans to study international relations with a focus on conflict resolution. "I want to find ways to solve problems without anyone having to get hurt," she explained during one visit. And Alexei Volkov, true to his word, became a teacher. After his release from federal prison, he earned his degree in education and now works with at-risk youth in urban schools. He sends Sarah a Christmas card every year, always with the same message: "Thank you for teaching me the difference between revenge and justice." But perhaps the most lasting legacy of Sarah Whitfield's story is found in the dozens of children who passed through her kitchen over the years, learning that safety and love can coexist with strength and courage. They grew up understanding that the most important battles are often fought not with weapons, but with patience, wisdom, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who need protection. Sarah Whitfield never wrote a memoir. She never accepted a medal or a commendation for her final mission. She simply continued to bake cookies every Sunday, to tend her garden, and to demonstrate through her daily actions that true strength is measured not by what you can destroy, but by what you can build and protect. In a world that often seems divided between those who fight and those who nurture, Sarah Whitfield proved that the most powerful people are those who can do both. She showed that it's possible to be a warrior and a grandmother, a soldier and a sanctuary, a protector and a provider of comfort. And every Sunday, as children gather around kitchen tables across America, sharing stories and homemade cookies with the adults who care for them, Sarah Whitfield's legacy lives on, not in classified files or military records, but in the simple, revolutionary act of choosing love over fear, community over isolation, and hope over despair. Sometimes the most important missions are the ones that look exactly like ordinary life. Sometimes the greatest heroes are the ones who never ask to be remembered. And sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world is nothing more than a plate of warm cookies and the patience to listen to a child's stories about their day.